Previously on the keys of time.
We now have the keys that are necessary to start to systematically unveil the Bible's chronology. The first two keys revealed the divinely ordained blueprint or framework for time. Keys 1 and 2 basically say that the blueprint is a week of 7 days of 1,000 years each. The next two keys resulted in the discovery of God's redemption chronology, which exists alongside the Bible's actual chronology. Key 3 says, at the end of every Jubilee cycle of 49 actual years, God adds a special 50th year of grace. Key 4 is the principle of unreckoned time, which says that God does not count times when his people's sin causes his plan of redemption to be suspended. This is convincingly revealed by the 479 completed years recorded in 1 Kings 6:1, which are 131 years short of the actual time. Now, the total times of servitude are also 131 years. So if they are subtracted from the total time, this gives exactly 479 years. We will now look at the next 490-year Great Jubilee cycle in the chronology of redemption, from the dedication of Solomon's temple to the decree of Artaxerxes to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. After Solomon's death, Solomon's son Rehoboam decided to impose higher taxes. This prompted a revolt by the 10 northern tribes, leaving just the 2 southern tribes of Benjamin and Judah loyal to Rehoboam. The result was a divided kingdom, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. For both kingdoms we're told how long each of their kings reigned and when they started their reign. The start of a reign is given in terms of the reign of the king in the other kingdom. This is called a synchronism. Moreover, Judah and Israel had different ways of measuring time. For example, there's the issue of whether they used accession years or not. And then there's the issue of whether they used Nisan or Tishri-based years. And then there's the issue of whether there were co-regencies and interregnums. The second reason for the difficulty of this period is in the connection of Israel's chronology with that of the surrounding nations which interacted with her, especially Egypt and Assyria and Babylon. The primary chronology we need to follow is that of Judah. The two kingdoms used different methods to measure the reigns of their kings. The first issue is when a king began counting the official years of his reign. The reigns of kings are given in whole numbers of years. There are two possibilities. The first method was the accession year system. The previous year in which he came to the throne was called his accession year. Only when the next year began did he enter his first official regnal year. So, the year in which the previous king died was counted to him as a complete year, even though he only ruled for part of it. Now, the second method was the non-accession year system. Here, there is no accession year, but the king counts the year in which he began to reign as his first year, even though he only reigned for part of it. As before, he also counts his final year as a complete year. On the non-accession year system, any transitional years are counted twice. The second issue is which month was used for the start of the official year for a king's reign. Nisan, which is the first month of the calendar year, or Tishri, which is the 7th month of the calendar year. Ahaziah only reigned over Judah for a few months. 2 Kings 8:25 and 26 tells us, in the 12th year of Joram, the son of Ahab, king of Israel, Ahaziah, the son of Jehoram, king of Judah, began to reign. Ahaziah reigned 1 year in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Athaliah, granddaughter of Omri, king of Israel. Also, 2 Kings 9:29 tells us, in the 11th year of Joram, the son of Ahab, Ahaziah had become king over Judah. 2 Kings 8:26 stated that Ahaziah reigned 1 year, in the non-accession system that Jehoram introduced into Judah. This means that he died in the same regnal year in which he began his reign. Otherwise, it would have counted as 2 years. Thus his reign only lasted a few months. If the accession year system had been used, he would have died in his accession year, and he would not have commenced his first regnal year, and so his reign would have been counted as 0 years. We've also seen that 2 Kings 9:29 tells us that he began his reign in the 11th year of Joram's reign in Israel, whilst 2 Kings 8:25 tells us that he began his reign in the 12th year of Joram's reign. This points to a brief co-regency for a year between Jehoram and his son Ahaziah in Judah. So, in the 11th year of Joram's reign in Israel, Ahaziah began to rule with his father, and in the 12th year of Joram, his sole reign began. This young king had a short and disastrous reign. He was influenced by his mother Athaliah, who was granddaughter of Omri, king of Israel. We're told in 2 Kings 8:27 that although Ahaziah was king of Judah, he walked in the ways of the house of King Ahab of Israel.
And he walked in the way of the house of Ahab, and did evil in the sight of the Lord, like the house of Ahab, for he was the son-in-law of the house of Ahab.
Allied with Joram, king of Israel, he fought against Hazael, king of Damascus. When Joram was wounded in battle by the Syrians, he returned to Jezreel to be healed, and Ahaziah visited him there. Divine judgment came upon both kings at the hand of Jehu, a captain of the army of Israel. 2 Kings 9:24 tells us that Jehu killed Joram with an arrow through the heart. Then verse 27 tells us that Ahaziah escaped but was fatally wounded as he escaped and died when he reached Megiddo. Thus, both kings, Ahaziah of Judah and Joram of Israel, were killed at the same time. After he deposed both kings, Jehu reigned in Israel, and Athaliah, the granddaughter of Omri, king of Israel, reigned in Judah. Thus, the date of Ahaziah's death gives us a synchronism between Judah and Israel, by which we can link their chronologies. Jehu starts his reign at the same time as Athaliah. After killing Joram, king of Israel, we read in 2 Kings 10:36 that Jehu reigned over Israel in his place for 28 years. It says, the period that Jehu reigned over Israel in Samaria was 28 years. Jehu founded the fourth and longest-running dynasty over Israel. We read in 1 Kings 19:16 and 17 that he was anointed as king over Israel by Elijah.
Also you shall anoint Jehu, the son of Nimshi, as king over Israel. And Elisha, the son of Shaphat of Abel-Meholah, you shall anoint as prophet in your place. It shall be that whoever escapes the sword of Hazael, Jehu will kill, and whoever escapes the sword of Jehu, Elisha will kill.
Jehu killed Jezebel, wife of King Ahab of Israel, and the rest of the house of Ahab. Because of his zeal in rooting out the false worship of Baal, in 2 Kings 10:30, the Lord promised him a dynasty which would last 4 generations. However, in spite of his acts of judgment on the house of Ahab, Jehu failed to walk in the ways of the Lord with all his heart, and continued in the ways of the first king of Israel, Jeroboam the son of Nebat, which made Israel to sin. After the death of Ahaziah, His mother Athaliah reigns in Judah. Athaliah was the daughter of Israel's king Ahab and Jezebel, and she was the granddaughter of King Omri of Israel. She was the wife of King Jehoram of Judah and the mother of King Ahaziah of Judah. Her marriage with Jehoram, king of Judah, formed an alliance between the northern and the southern kingdoms and implied the superiority of Israel. On the death of her son Ahaziah, she usurped the royal throne and executed all the royal heirs. Only Joash, who was the youngest of Ahaziah's children, survived. We read in 2 Kings 11, 1-3, when Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she rose and destroyed all the royal heirs. But Jehoshaphat, the daughter of King Jehoram, sister of Ahaziah, took Joash, the son of Ahaziah, and stole him away from among the king's sons who were being murdered, and they hid him and his nurse in the bedroom from Athaliah, so that he was not killed. So he was hidden with her in the house of the Lord for 6 years, while Athaliah reigned over the land. In the 7th year of Athaliah's reign, Jehoiada, the high priest, killed her. We read in 2 Chronicles 22:12, 2 Chronicles 23:1, and 2 Kings 11:16, it says, "And he, Joash, was with them, hidden in the house of God, and Athaliah reigned over the land. And in the 7th year, Jehoiada strengthened himself." So they seized her, they seized Athaliah, and she went by the way of the horse's entrance into the king's house, and there she was killed. We read in 2 Kings 11:21 that the surviving 7-year-old son of Ahaziah, Joash, was installed as king. 2 Kings 12:1 tells us that this was in the 7th year of Jehu's reign in Israel. It's no surprise that Athaliah, who was Jezebel's daughter, continued the non-accession year system, and this is confirmed by the synchronism of 2 Kings 12:1. Thus the last year of Jehoram also counted as the first year of the 1-year reign of Ahaziah, and the first year of the 7-year reign of Athaliah. Her reign is described differently from all the other reigns because she was a usurper. God had ordained that only kings from the house of David could sit on the throne of David in Jerusalem. He had promised David that his seed would sit on the throne, and ultimately the Messiah king, the son of David, would come and reign. Athaliah had ruled until Jehoiada, the high priest, organized an alliance to overthrow her. In the 7th year of her reign, we read in 2 Chronicles 23:3 that he gathered the captains of hundreds, the Levites, and the elders of the land together in Jerusalem and proclaimed that, "Behold, the king's son shall reign, as the Lord has said, of the sons of David." Thus God chose the seed of the Messiah to occupy the throne of David over Judah, and so he miraculously protected this line from Satan's attack, for Jesus would come from it. You can see God's preserving power in these troubled times by all the different dynasties in the northern kingdom, while Judah had just one dynasty, which was the house of David. The one brief exception was the evil Athaliah, wife of Jehoram. When her son Ahaziah died, she had seized the throne by killing off all the royal seed who had the right to rule. Satan inspired her to do this, for if she was successful in destroying the royal Davidic seed, this would have made it impossible for the Messiah to be born. However, God protected one child, Jehoash, through whom the kingly line of the Messiah could continue, by keeping him hidden until he was old enough to take power. Meanwhile, having apparently removed all competition, Athaliah reigned, but she had no right, for she was no son of David. Therefore, the length of her reign is measured differently from all other reigns. It's measured according to the life of Jehoash, the rightful heir, according to how long he was hidden, rather than the usurper queen. When measuring periods of time like this, the Jews used inclusive reckoning, which means any part of a year counts as a year. This agrees with non-accession year dating. Jehoash was restored as rightful heir to the throne of Judah by Jehoiada, the high priest, who killed his grandmother Athaliah after her reign of 7 years. We read in 2 Kings 12:1 and 2 Chronicles 24:1 that Jehoash then reigned for 40 years. In the 7th year of Jehu, Jehoash became king, and he reigned 40 years in Jerusalem. Jehoash was 7 years old when he became king. When he was 7, Jehoash, who had been hidden, was brought forth, and Queen Athaliah was removed. He was a rightful king, being in the royal messianic line of David. Thus the line of Messiah was preserved from destruction. The non-accession year system had to continue for his reign, for in his 23rd year we read in 2 Kings 10:36 and 2 Kings 13:1 that Jehu of Israel was in his 28th year, and the period that Jehu reigned over Israel in Samaria was 28 years. In the 23rd year of Jehoash, the son of Ahaziah, king of Judah, Jehoahaz, the son of Jehu, became king over Israel in Samaria and reigned 17 years. Jehoash repaired the house of the Lord, which had been desecrated by his wicked grandmother Athaliah. With the help of the high priest Jehoiada, he raised funds to restore the temple, and the vessels of service were remade. They offered burnt offerings in the temple continuously all the days of the high priest Jehoiada. However, after the death of Jehoiada, we read in 2 Chronicles 24:17 and 18 that King Jehoash listened to the people's desire to return to idolatry.
Now after the death of Jehoiada, the leaders of Judah came and bowed down to the king, and the king listened to them. Therefore they left the house of the Lord God of their fathers, and served wooden images and idols. And wrath came upon Judah and Jerusalem because of their trespass.
At this time we read in 2 Kings 13:1 that Jehoahaz of Israel reigned for 17 years. In the 23rd year of Joash, the son of Ahaziah, king of Judah, Jehoahaz, the son of Jehu, became king over Israel in Samaria and reigned 17 years. 2 Kings 13:1-3 tells us that Jehoahaz followed in the sins of Jeroboam, and that the worship of the golden calf continued.
And he did evil in the sight of the Lord, and followed the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, who had made Israel sin. He did not depart from them. Then the anger of the Lord was aroused against Israel, and he delivered them into the hand of Hazael, king of Syria, and into the hand of Ben-Hadad, the son of Hazael, all their days.
Jehoahaz pleaded with God for deliverance from the oppression of the Syrians, and the Lord sent a deliverer. Israel experienced a season of peace, but they still did not depart from the sins of Jeroboam. Jehoash, the son of Jehoahaz, then reigned for 16 years over Israel in Samaria. We read in 2 Kings 13:10, in the 37th year of Jehoash, king of Judah, began Jehoash, the son of Jehoahaz, to reign over Israel in Samaria, and reigned 16 years. By comparing this verse with 2 Kings 13:1, it's evident this Jehoash came to the throne before his father ended his reign. In the 23rd year of Jehoash, the son of Ahaziah, king of Judah, Jehoahaz, the son of Jehu, became king over Israel in Samaria and reigned 17 years. Thus there was a co-regency, and the synchronism, the 37th year of Jehoash, gives the start of the co-regency. The start of the sole reign is given by the previous king's death. In this case, it's the length of the king's sole reign that is given, which is 16 years. This is confirmed by the next synchronism, which we find in 2 Kings 14:1. This works perfectly if this is so, but it causes difficulties if not. This is the normal and the most clear and logical way for a co-regency to be reckoned, for giving the sole reign means overlapping years are not counted twice. But the synchronism gives the added information about when the co-regency began. We would naturally assume a co-regency is described this way, unless there were clear indications otherwise. The internal evidence is conclusive that Israel with King Jehoash and Judah with King Amaziah both changed to the accession year system at this point and stayed with it for the remaining time. We will discuss this further when we look next at the reign of Amaziah, king of Judah. During the reign of King Jehoash in Israel, we read in 2 Kings 13:14 that Elisha the prophet was dying.
Elisha had become sick with the illness of which he would die. Then Jehoash, the king of Israel, came down to him and wept over his face and said, "O my father, the chariots of Israel and their horsemen."
Elisha prophesied that Jehoash would only defeat Syria 3 times in battle, but would not completely destroy them. Hazael, king of Syria, had oppressed Israel all the days of Jehoahaz, but God was merciful in preserving Israel from total destruction. After Hazael's death, his son Ben-Hadad took the Syrian throne. 2 Kings 13:25 tells us that the 3 victories to recapture the cities of Israel which God had promised to Jehoash through Elisha on his deathbed now came to pass.
And Jehoash, the son of Jehoahaz, recaptured from the hand of Ben-Hadad, the son of Hazael, the cities which he had taken out of the hand of Jehoahaz his father by war. 3 times Jehoash defeated him and recaptured the cities of Israel.
Hello, I'm Derek Walker. I'm the pastor of the Oxford Bible Church. Today I want to introduce you to what I believe is a very special book called The Keys of Time, a revelation of Bible chronology. This book will give you a thorough grounding in the exciting subject of Bible chronology, revealing the keys by which you can unlock the treasure chest of God's Word concerning its revelation of time. And so we start, you see, by looking at the major keys that will unlock this treasure chest, like the fact that all time is based on the creation week, and one day with the Lord is as 1,000 years, and we look into the Jubilee and how that also unlocks how God measures time, and we look at the principle of unreckoned time. And as we see the whole revelation of God in history and time fit together perfectly, we will get out of this, we'll get a revelation of the glory of God as the sovereign Lord of time, the God who is working out his purposes of grace in his perfect time, according to his redemption timetable. So through this book, God will impart to you a rich understanding of the times, giving you a fresh revelation of the special time in which we're now living near the end of the age. and it will prepare you for the momentous events that are just ahead. Because we are living in the last days, and we need to understand the times that we're living in. We need to understand God's revelation of time in the Bible. And having discovered the keys and God's framework of time, we then go through each period of history, starting from Adam to Abraham, and then from Abraham to the Exodus, and then from the Exodus to the dedication of Solomon's temple, and then the period of time leading up to the decree to restore Jerusalem by Artaxerxes, and then finally Daniel's 70 weeks that take us to the coming of the Messiah himself and his death and resurrection. We look and we show how all the pieces fit together perfectly into God's framework of time. And by the end of the book, you will know how to get the date of every event, every major event in the Bible, and how all these events fit together. And so this will enrich your understanding of the whole Bible and how it all fits together perfectly. And there are DVDs that go with this book that will enhance your study of it.